Welcome everyone to the DAZN Soccer Show. Myself, Adi Oladipo, former Arsenal and England forward Leanne Sanderson, former Man City and Sheffield United midfielder Michael Brown. All right, let's talk Champions League. The final round of group games is upon us. Most of the teams, I say most of the teams, we're going to talk about some of the big boys that aren't through, but a lot of the groups now are settled. Tottenham's group is interesting, right? Tottenham, obviously, because of what happened against Sporting Lisbon and Antonio Conte losing more hair, they have to go to Marseille and make sure they get a point, which won't be easy. Spurs aren't playing well. We know that. Marseille aren't playing well as well. What's crazy is if Marseille get a result, they're not out either. So literally it isn't a balance. Let's talk about that game. Spurs having to go away to France and do something. You look at the Spurs team, and obviously a lot of the players that got to the Champions League final many years ago are still there. But it's a team, I think, that lacks European know-how in terms of knowing how just to get a result, whether it's ugly or not. They're going to need to learn that very, very quickly to almost not just get to the last 16, but go beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd expect Tottenham to win
Yeah.
in Marseille. It's not going to be an easy result, but I think we did the show last week and expected them to beat Sporting. So,
Yeah.
it's the Champions League. That's why the best teams are in it. But I think I've watched Marseille the last couple of years. They've still got Payet, Guendouzi. So he's going to want to prove a point
Yeah.
being a former Arsenal player. But it's not going to be easy. And I think the fact of the results that Tottenham are getting of late, I think the biggest result that I noticed performance-wise was against Manchester United. Now, I'm a Man United fan, but I feel like, and everyone was talking about how great Manchester United were playing, but I thought Tottenham were very, very poor. Same as, against Bournemouth, they didn't have the greatest performance the second half. They took it to another level, but, they can't afford to switch off. And sometimes I think Spurs' back line, I know a lot of people have spoken about Eric Dyer, but I think in Europe, I still think he needs to give a little bit more. I still think a lot of the European players are dropping their shoulder, going the other way. We've seen it happen in this competition. So I think defensively, they're going to have to be sound, but I think Tottenham are good enough to go to Marseille and at least get a point, and they need a point to be able to progress.
Yeah, how big a win now is that game against Bournemouth going into this, right? I mean, again, you're 2-0 down at Bournemouth, you get the last-minute win, and that in terms of momentum, in terms of confidence going to Marseille is massive now, isn't it, Michael?
Well, it is, and you're starting to question, aren't you? Obviously, not winning the last game, obviously, there were circumstances that went against Spurs, and psychologically, when you're going into the game at Marseille, you're thinking, is it meant to be? When you don't get that result, you go behind. At Bournemouth, yes, there's a good reaction, but I do feel there's a lot of negativity around Spurs going into this game, which will make it increasingly harder for this Spurs side, who are questioned so many times about that resolve when things are hard. Milky Spurs is mentioned so many times that they can't get over the line. So it will be a big test for them when they're not obviously as confident. And I think it'll be a tough one for them for sure. Yeah. And when you're not playing well, is getting that rhythm. Lots of changes. The back three were mentioned again from the manager. I know the games and the injuries are there for the squad, but they still should be doing so much better with the level of players that they've got.
It's an interesting group because there is no standout team, right? You look at the other groups and there's your big hitters. This group, Eintracht Frankfurt, obviously Europa League winners, so they're going to be good. Marseille, Sporting Lisbon. You would have expected Spurs, who still are top of the table, you would have looked at their squad of players, Antonio Conte, what they bought in the window as well, and you would have thought that we would have got through this group a lot more comfortably.
Yeah, I'd say so, but I think I have a different perspective as well because, like I mentioned earlier, I think we have to be realistic of where Tottenham Hotspur are at. And I don't think any Tottenham fan expected them to get in the Champions League this time last year.
Yeah.
They really wasn't in a place to be able to be there. So I almost feel like they need another transfer window. In his first transfer window, he brought in Juventus players that he knew, Bentancur and Kulusevski. That makes sense because I think they've been great additions to the team. And at Juventus, they didn't really play that much. So I think Antonio Conte does need another window to be able to bring in his type of players because, like I said, I don't think they expected to make the Champions League. I'm sure Daniel Levy, when Nuno left, didn't expect, he brought in Conte, yes, but because he's a winner. But then at the same time, like we mentioned before, he doesn't always stay at clubs. So there's probably this balance that they're trying to find right now at Tottenham Hotspur. But I think the fact they're even in the Champions League at this point, as crazy as that sounds, is a massive overachievement because that should have been wrapped up by Arsenal. Arsenal threw it away in the end. Tottenham deserves to be there. But I think they're showing in this competition exactly where they're at because if they get through, right, and they play against a bigger team, do people think Tottenham are going to win the Champions League? No, they're not. I know it's all about if you get there, you can win, but they're not in a place right now that I see where they can progress in the Champions League very far.
Yeah, and look at the players that they brought in, Michael. Look, Perisic, obviously, Champions League experience, right? But the others, Richarlison, no, right? Nothing with Everton and Watford. Jed Spence, nothing. Basuma, nothing. So you feel like if Antonio Conte is going to still remain at the club in January, you might need to look at players with a bit more experience to take him a bit further in this competition.
Yeah, and that's what obviously we discussed earlier of regards to the level of players. A Jed Spence one would be a one that obviously could progress over time with the coaching playing in that side. You feel like his value will always be there. But other players, I feel like you watch sort of this Liverpool side, Van Dijk, Alisson, huge signings that went into the team that you knew they were going to play. They've made a huge difference. I don't feel Spurs ever seem to get that main different starter that goes into the team to develop the side and to make them so much better. So recruitment wise, obviously, they're always happy to have that strength and depth, but to have that sort of £80 million player, they just can't seem to get to that.
We always like to look for sort of good stories in football, right? We've got so many, and we're going to talk about the Dirty Dozen a bit later, the European Super League breakaway teams. But Group F, Real Madrid are through, and that's a straight shootout between Shakhtar Donetsk and RB Leipzig. And Shakhtar, I love that story just because of what's happened in Ukraine, what's going on in Ukraine as well. I feel like it's such a feel-good factor. And look, I have no dog in the fight here, but it's such a feel-good factor if they go through, just because, again, of what the country's been through, what a lot of their players' families have been through as well. It would be nice to see them progress.
Yeah, it would. And I think to bring reality to the situation, the Ukrainian League happened this weekend and they had the sirens going off.
Yeah.
And they had to abandon the game for a moment of time. So it's quite amazing, really, to think about this type of story because football, sometimes we don't think things are bigger than football to a certain degree in this country, but things are bigger. And this is fantastic. The fact that these players are still able to go out there and perform in the way that they are, what a story it will be if they're able to progress through.
Yeah, it'll be nice to see them through. There's been a few teams that have surprised us, Michael, so far. At Napoli, who I think look really dangerous, and no one wants to see them in the last 16. Club Brugge as well surprised us. But again, Shakhtar Donetsk, if they go through, again, we look for those nice stories in football, don't we? We've had VAR and managers being fined on the touchline. It's nice to get a feel-good story.
Well, that's what we all want, don't we? And that's what football can deliver. Obviously, a team who've had such adversity to come through it. And the Champions League's tough. We're talking about a Spurs side who have in a group where you think they can just probably coast through it. As Leanne says, they wouldn't have been in the Champions League. So to get through, I mean, it'd be some success story. That's what the Champions League brings, because at times you look at certain groups and certain teams that are put together and it almost gives you no chance, really. So, yeah, it'll be a great success and we'll soon see how the outcome is.
It certainly will do. We've spoken about teams that will go through. There's a lot of big teams that won't go through. And it kind of goes back to the European Super League. You think of that Dirty Dozen, they're called. Only 5 are so far guaranteed to progress. A lot of them have gone, right? Barcelona have gone. Juventus have gone. Atletico Madrid have gone. Others will follow them as well. What does this say about those teams that were so desperate to almost break away, maybe because of financially, but they're now out of the group stages of the Champions League? I never, ever would have thought that Juventus, Barcelona, Atletico Madrid would be out at the same time from the group stage of the Champions League.
Yeah, I don't think any of us did, but I think the universe works in mysterious ways to a certain degree, because I don't agree with what they've been trying to do for a number of years. And I feel like it's an insult to the rest of the football world.
Yeah.
And money is starting to talk in football. We're seeing the working class fan not be able to afford to go to games. And I feel like it's almost like the rich get richer and everybody else has to just kind of suck it up. When you see the attendances, when you see how much it is to go to games, I don't think these businessmen and businesswomen care.
Yeah.
And that worries me to a certain degree. But I think as well, with these teams dropping down into the Europa League, like I feel for the Europa League teams as well. You've got these big heavy hitters that are coming down, and these teams are having a really good run in the Europa League. And now I'm sure none of those expected, but I was at Juventus for 2 seasons and there was so much emphasis on winning the Champions League because they'd got to the finals, not won. They bought Cristiano Ronaldo, and I think they failed to build a team around him. Yeah. They've still got Cuadrado there. They've still got Alexandro, players that really are not at that level anymore. They bought in Vlahovic as well from Fiorentina.
Yeah.
Been indifferent. He's a good goal scorer. I think he should have gone to Arsenal, and I'm sure he thinks that as well at this point. So, the big heavy hitters have gone down, but there are some fantastic stories in the Champions League. I mean, Club Brugge going through top of the group, Napoli, as you mentioned, it's fantastic. And this is why, we love the Champions League, because Club Brugge, what a story that'll be. Imagine if they got all the way to the final. Not getting carried away.
No, you are.
But against Atletico Madrid, they held their own. They defend really, really well. They defend really well.
You're right. Michael, it is weird though, isn't it? Because look, we've all grown up and Juventus are always there. Last 16, semi-final, final. Barcelona, again, another team. Atletico Madrid in the last few years, always there as well. To see all these big hitting teams sort of not make it even to the knockout stages, and what this does for them financially, especially at Barcelona, have almost gambled on making that Champions League money. This is so damaging to those clubs.
You look at Barcelona and you think, obviously, that's a name you would say is going to be right towards the end of the Champions League. But we've looked at Manchester United, the turnaround in that football club, Liverpool for so many years in the Premier League. So we can talk about huge clubs, obviously, having their struggles. And I think it's just a cycle of players. At times it happens. And it's the Champions League that you're going to see some big players, big teams, obviously with disappointment. So, yeah, Juventus, obviously you expect better. We talk about breakaways. We talk about clubs who are trying to sustain it for such a longevity. You understand why they do it, and it's wrong why they are trying to create it, because it's obviously about greed. They want that success. They want to be in and around it. But teams are struggling out there. We're seeing in the Premier League with Liverpool now, that turnaround that they're having. But Barcelona, the mainstay of Champions League, that's where you'd say would be the biggest story.
And second year in a row at this point, going out of the competition. I think people thought they'd progressed under Xavi. But for me, I just never can get my head around the fact that they were struggling to register players. You know, they were running out of money, but then they were so able to sign players, signing Aubameyang, Dani Alves, Lewandowski. Like, it didn't make sense to me. So I think sometimes, when you do things in that way, you kind of get what you deserve in the end.
Yeah. So many big hitters have already gone. A few more big hitters might go as well. Remember, the draw for the knockout stages is November 7th. The actual last 16 games, starts the first week in February, so it should be a fun one. Some big boys have gone. Some other smaller clubs, though, are still there, and that's good to see in the Champions League.